Have you ever lived beside someone for decades, only to realize you never truly knew them at all? My name is Cora, I'm 70 years old, and I have a confession to make. For 45 years, I was married to a man named Frank. To the outside world, we looked steady, dependable, the couple that had it all figured out. 2 children, 3 grandchildren, a home in Connecticut, and a marriage that seemed unshakable. But let me tell you the truth. My life was held together by silence. 30 years of it. For 3 decades, I suspected my husband of cheating. 30 years of perfume I didn't recognize. Late-night phone calls, sudden fishing trips, and lies disguised as work conferences. And for 30 years, I swallowed my pain and kept the family together. People called me lucky to have such a faithful man. They didn't know the quiet battles I fought when no one was watching. I want you to stop for a second and think. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy that it bent your back and weighed on every breath you took? Have you ever smiled for the sake of your children, even when your heart was cracking in half? That was me. For 30 long years. But everything changed on the night of our 45th wedding anniversary. Frank raised a glass to me in a fancy restaurant and said I was the love of his life. His voice sounded sweet, but his eyes looked bored, tired of me, tired of us, tired of pretending. In that moment, something inside me broke. I decided I would no longer be the quiet wife he thought he owned. I wanted him to feel exposed, humiliated. I wanted the world to see him the way I had seen him for decades, a liar. And so I made a choice. In my bathroom sat a bottle of heavy-duty glue. In his, a bottle of personal lubricant he used to prepare for his secret nights. I switched them, one bottle for another. A simple act, but one that would change everything. That night ended with flashing red lights, firefighters, and neighbors staring wide-eyed from their porches. Frank, my husband of 45 years, was dragged out of our house in the most humiliating way possible. He begged me for help. He cried out my name. And I stood there, calm, because at last the silence had broken. But let me tell you the truth. This story isn't as simple as a husband cheating and a wife taking revenge. There are layers you don't expect. The truth that came out that night wasn't the one I thought I'd been carrying for 30 years. And in some ways, the truth hurt even more. Before I go on, let us do a special prayer to you, honey. May your days be filled with strength, your nights with peace, and your heart with the kind of love that outlasts every storm. Amen. Now, before we continue, I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel, click that like button, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing which corner of the world my story is reaching. When people looked at me and Frank, they thought we had it all. A cozy house with flowers blooming in the front yard, a dining table that never seemed empty on Sundays, and the laughter of children echoing in every corner when our grandchildren came to visit. I played the role of the proud grandmother perfectly. I baked cookies. I ironed school uniforms when my daughter dropped them off in a rush. I hosted Christmas dinners. People saw stability. They saw endurance. They saw what they thought was love. But let me tell you a truth most people don't like to admit. A house can look steady on the outside, while every brick inside is shaking. It began 30 years ago. Frank had just returned from what he claimed was a business trip to Boston. He was an architect, the kind of man who always carried scraps of paper filled with sketches, who smelled faintly of pencil lead and coffee. But that night, something was different. He hugged me when he came through the door, and I noticed his briefcase looked too neat, none of the usual blueprints sticking out, none of the smudges. His hands, usually marked with ink or dust, were spotless. And he smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine. Not anything I had ever worn. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I convinced myself I was tired, that I was seeing shadows where there were none. But the next morning, while folding his suit jacket, I found something I could never explain away, a single long strand of brown hair. My hair had already turned silver years earlier. There was no way it was mine. My fingers trembled as I brushed it off the fabric. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. Then, in the breast pocket of that same jacket, I found a napkin. On it was a phone number written in looping, careful handwriting. Next to it, one word, Brenda. I held that napkin in my hands as if it were a weapon. My whole body shook. 30 years of marriage, 2 children, and a life built together. And suddenly there it was, proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that Frank's devotion had cracks. You might think I confronted him right away. That I stormed into his study, demanded answers, threw the napkin at his face. But I didn't. I folded it carefully, slipped it into my nightstand, and stayed quiet. Why? Because I was afraid. My father had left my mother when I was a teenager. He ran off with another woman, leaving my mother with 5 children and a reputation in the town that never healed. I watched my mother shrink under the weight of humiliation. Neighbors whispered. Friends kept their distance. She struggled to pay the bills, and we lived with the sting of being the abandoned family. I swore I would never put myself or my children through that. So I stayed silent. Every time I opened that drawer and saw the napkin, my stomach twisted. Every phone call Frank took in a low voice, every sudden trip, every faint whiff of perfume I didn't recognize, I felt the fire burning inside me. But I built a wall around it. I smiled at birthdays. I stood next to him at weddings. I held his hand at church. People thought we were steady, but I knew better. Let me ask you something. Have you ever swallowed words that were tearing your throat apart just to keep peace? Have you ever pretended for the sake of your children, even when the truth was clawing at your heart? If you have, then you know exactly how I felt. I convinced myself my silence was for my children. I didn't want Chloe or Daniel growing up with divorced parents, visiting me on one weekend and their father on another. I wanted them to have grandparents sitting together at school recitals, at Christmas mornings, at family barbecues. Later, when the grandchildren came along, I told myself I was keeping the family together for them too. But silence doesn't heal. Silence rots. The longer I stayed quiet, the more it felt like I was disappearing. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman whose smile no longer reached her eyes. When my daughter asked, "How are you, Mom?" I always said, "I'm fine," though nothing about me was fine. The lie became second nature, like brushing my teeth or folding laundry. Frank must have thought he was clever. He thought I didn't notice when he left on a Friday evening with a fishing rod and came back smelling of cologne I'd never bought him. He thought I didn't notice how quickly he turned his phone face down when I walked into a room. But I noticed everything. I saw the guilt when he gave me gifts, the way he stiffened at any TV show that mentioned adultery, the nervous smile he wore whenever I looked at him for too long. And still, I said nothing. Every Sunday when my daughter called, I lied. Every holiday dinner, I pretended. Every night, I curled up on my side of the bed, wide awake, listening to Frank breathe in his sleep, wondering where his thoughts had been only hours before. Have you ever stayed quiet to keep appearances? Do you know someone who has smiled through their suffering just so the neighbors wouldn't talk? If you do, then you understand the kind of prison silence can become. For 30 years, I carried that napkin in my drawer. 30 years of swallowing my rage, my pain, my humiliation, so my children and grandchildren could have a picture-perfect family. I told myself it was a sacrifice. I told myself it was strength. But it was really scary. And fear, my dear, can age a woman faster than time ever could. 30 years is a long time to carry a secret in your chest. Some women scream, some leave, some throw plates at the wall. I did none of those things. I chose the hardest path of all. I stayed quiet. I became an expert at fake smiles. At family gatherings, I laughed at Frank's jokes, passed him the gravy boat at Thanksgiving, and kissed his cheek when relatives snapped photos. People thought they were capturing love, but I knew they were only freezing a lie in time. At night, the house would fall silent except for his whispers on the phone. He thought I was asleep, but I heard every hushed word, every muffled laugh. Sometimes he turned his back to me, shoulders hunched, his voice lowered to a murmur. I stared at the ceiling, my fists clenched under the sheets, swallowing the urge to shout, "I hear you, Frank. I know you're not alone in those conversations." He traveled often. Conferences, he called them. Fishing trips, he claimed. Suitcases packed, cologne sprayed, his eyes avoiding mine. He would leave, and I would be left with the creak of the empty house. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it felt like it mocked me, counting down the hours of my loneliness. While he was gone, I pretended everything was fine. I tended the garden, I cooked meals for one, I called my daughter and lied about how happy we were. But when the sun went down and I climbed the stairs, my knees screamed with every step. The doctor called it arthritis, but to me it felt like chains tightening around my legs. Each movement was a reminder of how trapped I had become, not just in my body, but in my marriage. Frank controlled the money. He always had. He told me not to worry, that he had everything handled. I wanted to believe him. I had no access to the accounts, no knowledge of what came in or went out. He made sure of that. He liked me dependent. He liked me small. It kept me from asking too many questions, from demanding too many answers. Some days, I would sit at the kitchen table and wonder what my life could have been if I had spoken up 30 years earlier. If I had confronted him about the perfume, the hair, the napkin with Brenda's name. Would I have been divorced, humiliated, struggling like my mother? Or would I have been free, building a life on my own terms? The questions haunted me, but I never let them pass my lips. Let me pause here and ask you, what would you have done if you were me? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of your children, your reputation, your grandchildren's smiles at Christmas dinner? Or would you have confronted him, torn down the lie, and faced the fire no matter the cost? Tell me in the comments, because I wonder every single day what I should have done. The truth is, my silence ate away at me. Frank might have had his secret life, but I had my secret misery. He got perfume and hotel rooms. I got aching joints and a house that felt colder with each passing year. He lived in whispers. I lived in emptiness. When our grandchildren visited, I forced myself to be cheerful. I baked pies, played board games, read bedtime stories. Their laughter was my only medicine. But when they went home and the house fell quiet again, I would sit in my chair with tears stinging my eyes, wondering how much longer I could carry the weight of pretending. Frank, of course, carried on as if nothing was wrong. He bought me gifts, jewelry, flowers, scarves. But every ribbon he tied around a box felt like guilt disguised as generosity. I would smile, thank him, kiss his cheek, and tuck the gift away in a drawer I never opened again. Sometimes when I caught my reflection, I didn't recognize myself. The woman in the mirror looked tired, older than her years. Her shoulders slumped under the burden of silence. Her eyes looked hollow, like the light had been drained out of them. I hated that woman, but she was me. The resentment built slowly, like water rising in a flood. At first, I told myself I could endure it for the children. Later, I told myself it was for the grandchildren. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of being alone. So I built my own fortress, not of stone, not of wood, but of silence. Brick by brick, every lie I swallowed became another wall around me. It kept the family picture intact, but it buried me alive inside. The night of our 45th wedding anniversary should have been a celebration. At least, that's what Frank wanted people to think. He booked a table at the Oak Room, the same restaurant where he had proposed all those years ago. To anyone else, it might have seemed romantic. To me, it felt like a performance, another scene in a play we'd both been forced to act in for decades. He held the door open for me, like a gentleman. He ordered my favorite wine, as if he remembered it out of devotion rather than habit. He smiled across the table, but it was the kind of smile a man wears when he's reciting lines he no longer believes in. The waiters floated past with trays of food and polished glasses. Candles flickered on the table between us, their light casting shadows across his face. I studied him the way I used to study a blueprint, every line, every flaw, every corner that didn't fit. For years, I had been convincing myself that the cracks were small, that they could be ignored. But that night, the truth stood clear as glass. When the main course arrived, Frank rose to make a toast. He clinked his glass with his fork, drawing polite attention from nearby diners. He lifted his wine and said, "To my wonderful wife, 45 years, and not a day goes by that I don't feel like the luckiest man in the world." The words sounded smooth, but I was watching his hands. His wedding band had worn so thin over the years that it looked fragile, almost ready to snap in half. And in that thin, frail circle of metal, I saw my life. A marriage stretched too far, worn down by lies. carrying weight it was never built to carry. He squeezed my hand, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel warmth. I felt theft. He had stolen my youth, my trust, my dignity. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating me out of my own life. I smiled back at him, but inside I was on fire. As he sat down and sipped his wine, I made my decision. I would no longer be the silent wife, the fragile bird in his cage. I would no longer swallow my rage for the sake of appearances. No, I would make him pay. That night, when we returned home, Frank went into his study like he always did. He liked to pretend he was working late, though I knew better. I climbed the stairs slowly, my knees aching with every step. Each throb of pain felt like a drumbeat, a reminder of everything he had taken from me. When I reached his bathroom, I saw it there on the counter, a bottle of personal lubricant. Small, innocent-looking, a symbol of the double life he thought he had hidden so well. My chest tightened, but my hands grew steady. I walked into my bathroom, opened the cabinet under the sink, and reached past old shampoos and soaps until my hand touched something cold and heavy. A large bottle of industrial glue. Thick, strong, final. I placed it on the counter next to Frank's lubricant. The two bottles looked nearly identical, one meant for pleasure, the other for destruction. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at them side by side. My heart pounded, my breath came shallow, but my hands did not shake. This was my moment of transformation. I had been silent for 30 years. Tonight, I would speak without saying a word. I unscrewed the lid of the lubricant, poured its slick contents down the drain, and rinsed the bottle clean. I picked up the glue, twisted open the cap, and began to fill the empty space. If you could hear it, you would hear the slow, heavy drip. Thick white liquid sliding into the plastic bottle, each drop echoing like a ticking clock. Plop, plop, plop. A sound that sealed my revenge. When the bottle was full, I sealed it tight, wiped it clean, and set it back on Frank's vanity, exactly where it had been. The ordinary label promised intimacy, but inside it was nothing but punishment. I hid the evidence of my switch, tucking the empty glue container deep into the cabinet under my sink. The house was silent around me, but for the first time in years, the silence felt like an ally instead of a prison. The next morning, Frank moved through the house whistling. He poured himself coffee, kissed my cheek, and even brought home flowers that evening. He had no idea that his world was about to collapse. Every fake smile he gave me, every affectionate gesture, only fueled my satisfaction. He thought he was in control. He had no idea I had already set the stage for his downfall. I carried the secret of what I had done with a calm that shocked me. I cooked his favorite meals, wore the nightgown he liked, and nodded sweetly when he suggested a romantic evening. He believed he was winning me over again. But I knew he was walking straight into the trap I had prepared. For 30 years, I had been the prisoner of silence. But that night, holding that bottle in my hands, I became something else entirely. I became the judge, the executioner, and the architect of his humiliation. After I switched the bottles, I carried on as if nothing had changed. Frank had no idea the ground beneath his feet was already cracking. He strutted around the house, whistling while he shaved, humming while he dressed, his confidence dripping from every gesture. If only he had known that the stage was set, and I was the one pulling the strings. I played my part well. I cooked his favorite meals, the ones he believed would soften me. Roast chicken with garlic potatoes, apple pie with cinnamon. I wore the pearl earrings he had given me years ago. Earrings I once thought were tokens of love but now recognized as tokens of guilt. I smiled, I laughed at his small talk, I let him believe we were reconnecting. But every smile I gave him was laced with venom he couldn't taste. When I suggested we have a quiet evening together, just the two of us, his face lit up like a boy promised a new toy. Tonight, he asked, trying to mask his eagerness. I nodded, my voice steady. Tonight. That afternoon, I cleaned the house like I was preparing for company. Candles in the dining room, soft music in the background, the smell of a steak roasting in the oven. To him, it must have felt like the beginning of reconciliation. To me, it was preparation for judgment. We sat at the table, the glow of the candles flickering between us. I cut into my food calmly while watching him devour his like a man too hungry to savor. He poured me wine, clinked his glass against mine, and flashed that same polished smile he had used at the restaurant. I returned it, but my smile was hollow. My heart wasn't fluttering with affection. It was steady with certainty. After dinner, I suggested we take the celebration upstairs. He agreed instantly, practically glowing with excitement. His voice had a tremor of anticipation, like a schoolboy who had gotten away with mischief for far too long. He believed tonight was his prize. He had no idea tonight was his sentence. I walked slowly up the stairs, my knees aching as always, but my spirit carried me higher than my body could. Every step felt like a drumbeat in a march toward justice. In the bedroom, I lit a few more candles, setting the room in a soft glow. Frank disappeared into his bathroom to freshen up. I waited, standing by the bed, my hands folded calmly in front of me. My ears strained for every sound. The click of the door, the opening of the cabinet, the uncap of the bottle. Then silence. A few seconds later came the first gasp. A confused grunt. A scraping sound against the tiles. Then came the panic. "Cora," he yelled, his voice cracking with alarm. There was the sound of frantic shuffling, objects clattering against the counter, and then a desperate cry. "Cora, help me." I moved toward the door, slowly, like a queen walking to her throne. I pushed it open just enough to see him. Frank was on his knees, his hands glued fast to the bottle. His face twisted in horror, his body jerking as he tried to pull himself free. Sweat poured down his forehead as he yanked and tugged, but the glue held him in place with unyielding force. The sound of his struggle filled the bathroom. Grunts, curses, the slap of skin against tile, the futile pull of flesh against plastic. His voice rose higher, cracking with humiliation. "What did you do?" he rasped, eyes wide with the first flicker of understanding. I leaned against the doorway, calm, steady, almost serene. "I fixed things, Frank," I whispered. His eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought the weight of 30 years had finally crashed down on him. But what I saw wasn't just guilt. It wasn't the shame of being caught. It was something else, something deeper. His face wasn't only twisted in embarrassment. It was clouded by dread, the kind of dread that goes far beyond exposure. He struggled harder, calling my name again, this time in desperation rather than anger. His voice wasn't that of a cheating husband caught in a trap. It was that of a man whose secrets went far beyond infidelity. I stood there, watching, cold and unblinking. I thought humiliation would be enough. But the way he looked at me in that moment told me the truth. This wasn't only about betrayal in the arms of another woman. His despair was too heavy, too consuming. That was the first moment I realized. I had prepared revenge for one kind of lie, but I might have stumbled into something far worse. I thought I had seen every expression a man could wear, but nothing compared to the look on Frank's face that night. His eyes darted between me and his glued hands, wide with disbelief and panic. His voice cracked as he pleaded, cursed, begged, all at once. I watched in silence, cold and unshaken, until his thrashing grew so desperate I knew the scene would end one way or another. I picked up the phone. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the kind of controlled performance I had perfected over decades of pretending. "My husband's had an accident," I told the operator. "He's stuck, it's glue. Please, send someone quickly." Minutes later, red and blue lights bathed the street outside. Sirens wailed, neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, and soon half the neighborhood was gathered on their porches, drawn by curiosity they could not resist. When the firefighters entered our home, I saw their eyes flicker with disbelief before their training forced their faces into neutrality. They had walked into a scene no manual could have prepared them for. A man in his 70s, on his knees in a tiled bathroom, glued to an object no man would want to be discovered with. They tried to keep their tone professional, but I caught the sideways glances, the clenched jaws, the suppressed chuckles. 2 paramedics followed, carrying kits they clearly had no idea how to apply in this situation. The room buzzed with awkwardness, embarrassment, and the unspoken knowledge that this would be a story retold in whispers for years. Frank shouted at them, shouted at me, shouted at the world. His voice was raw, cracked by panic. It was a mistake. I didn't know. Help me. His cries spilled into the hallway, out the door, and onto the street where neighbors had gathered. Soon, everyone knew. The firefighters worked quickly, but their tools weren't designed for this. They called in more equipment. They whispered into radios, trying to describe what they were dealing with without laughing. The whole scene became a spectacle. And there I stood, calm in my robe, watching the man who had humiliated me for 30 years finally taste humiliation himself. But then something shifted. In the middle of the chaos, a black car pulled up. The door opened, and a man in a wrinkled suit stepped out. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't a firefighter. He wasn't even a friend. He pushed his way through the gathering crowd with the confidence of someone who knew exactly why he was there. When his eyes landed on Frank, his lips curled into a bitter smile. "Thought you could hide from me, Frank?" His voice cut through the noise like a blade. The firefighters paused, confused. I froze where I stood. The man moved closer, towering over Frank, who was still trapped on his knees. All those lies. All those excuses. Faking health problems, skipping work, dodging calls. You thought glue would be your biggest problem tonight. I frowned. His words didn't fit the story I had told myself for 30 years. Who was this man? The stranger crouched low, his voice dropping to a growl only we could hear. You owe me. $250,000. And I always collect. My stomach lurched. $250,000? My eyes shot to Frank, whose face was no longer twisted in embarrassment but in defeat. It wasn't Brenda. It wasn't perfume. It wasn't another woman. For 30 years, I had believed I was living in the shadow of an affair, carrying proof in a napkin tucked into my drawer. But that night, in front of the whole neighborhood, the truth spilled out. Frank hadn't been cheating on me with another woman. He had been cheating me out of our entire future. Gambling. Debt. A hidden life not of lust, but of loss. My knees nearly buckled, but I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. The man, his name later I would learn was Ben, stood and straightened his jacket. 3 days, he said. You either pay up or I own this house brick by brick. With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving silence heavy in his wake. The firefighters went back to work, freeing Frank with careful hands and serious faces, but I barely noticed them anymore. My mind was reeling. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about Frank's betrayal, about my revenge, it was all built on sand. The whispers of the neighbors outside grew louder, buzzing like angry bees. They had no idea about the gambling, the debts, the destruction of our savings. They only saw the ridiculous spectacle of Frank being pried apart by firefighters. But I knew the deeper humiliation. Not only had my revenge been for the wrong crime, but in exposing him, I had exposed us both. When Frank was finally released, his hands raw and trembling, he wouldn't meet my eyes. The paramedics wrapped him in a blanket, as though warmth could fix what had been shattered. I stood there, my arms crossed, my face calm but my chest burning. Our entire life savings. Gone. Every dollar I thought we had set aside for retirement, drained into bets and promises that could never be kept. My silence had not protected us, it had destroyed us. Neighbors began to disperse, shaking their heads, whispering behind their hands. Our home, once admired, was now the stage of a scandal. I knew I would hear the gossip for years. And yet, the deepest wound wasn't public shame. It was the realization that the man I had hated for cheating wasn't a cheater at all. He was something worse. A gambler. A liar. A thief who had stolen decades of my labor and trust. So let me ask you, as someone who has lived both pains, what cuts deeper? To find out your spouse has been unfaithful in love, or to discover they've destroyed your future in secret? Tell me in the comments, because I wouldn't wish either fate on anyone. When the flashing lights faded and the last firefighter rolled up his hose, the house felt hollow. Frank had been freed, wrapped in a blanket, and scolded for his accident, but the truth wasn't left behind with the tools and laughter. The truth came home with me, heavy as chains. I walked back inside, closing the door against the whispers of the neighborhood. My robe hung loose on my shoulders, my hands trembling, not from age this time, but from the collapse of everything I thought I knew. Frank sat on the couch, silent. His face was pale, his body slumped, his eyes refusing to meet mine. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, him exposed, humiliated, begging. But now that it had arrived, it tasted nothing like victory. I turned away from him and went to the one place he had always guarded, his study. That room had been locked to me for decades. I had always imagined love notes, trinkets, and secrets of another woman. What I found was worse. The desk drawers were filled with slips of paper, betting stubs, dates, cryptic numbers scribbled in frantic handwriting. I pulled out bank statements and froze. Our savings account drained. The retirement fund gone. 30 years of work and sacrifice, empty. My hands shook as I flipped through the papers, seeing not romance but ruin. I had built my fortress of silence thinking it would protect me. Instead, it had hidden the slow theft of my life. I turned to Frank, who had followed me to the doorway, his shoulders hunched like a guilty schoolboy. For a moment, I saw not the man who had humiliated me in front of neighbors, but a broken figure shrinking under the weight of his own destruction. What was it all for, Frank? My voice cracked, but it was steady enough to slice the air. 30 years of lies. The trips. The whispers. The secrets. Was it worth it? Was gambling away our future worth leaving me in the dark? He lifted his head, and for the first time in decades, tears filled his eyes. It was for you, Cora, he whispered. The words made my skin prickle. For me? My fists clenched around the papers. Don't you dare put this on me. Don't you dare say you stole from us for me. He staggered forward, pulled out a folded pamphlet from his wallet, and held it out with trembling hands. I snatched it, ready to shred it, but when I looked down, my anger faltered. The pamphlet was for a medical trial in Boston. Bold letters at the top read, "Mend a joint. An experimental gene therapy for advanced osteoarthritis." The kind of treatment I had only dreamed of, the kind no insurance would touch, the kind that cost more than we could ever afford. I stared at it, my breath shallow. He swallowed hard. I've seen you, Cora. The nights you can't sleep because your knees ache. The way you wince just climbing the stairs. I couldn't stand it anymore. I thought if I could win enough, I could give you back your life. The room spun. My hands, twisted by age and pain, clutched the paper until it crumpled. For 30 years, I had believed he was betraying me with another woman. In truth, he was betraying me with a different obsession, a misguided attempt to save me. It was almost too much to bear. I felt rage burn through me, rage that he had gambled away our security, that he had lied to me for decades, that he had left me to rot in silence while he played hero in secret. Yet beneath the rage, grief flooded in, because the man I thought despised me had been trying, in his own reckless way, to love me. I looked at him, at the tears sliding down the face I had grown old beside. He wasn't a slick cheater, laughing in hotel rooms with a mistress. He was a desperate man drowning in failure, clinging to the idea that winning money could buy me freedom from pain. And I didn't know which was worse. Was it worse to have lived 30 years believing in an affair that never existed, building my hatred on a shadow? Or was it worse to find out the truth, that his betrayal wasn't lust, but a reckless gamble with everything we had built together? My heart tore in two. Part of me wanted to strike him, to scream until my voice broke. The other part wanted to collapse in his arms, because even in his ruin, he had been thinking of me. I pressed my palm against the pamphlet and whispered, almost to myself, "You stole our life, Frank. You stole our safety. You stole my trust. And you tell me it was love." He reached out, his hands still raw from the glue, and his voice cracked. "It was the only way I knew. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I could give you that treatment, you'd forgive me for everything else." I shook my head. Tears blurred my vision. My silence, his lies, our life, it all collapsed in that room. So I ask you, honey, would you forgive this? Would you look at a man who destroyed your future but claimed it was for love and say love is enough? Or would you carry your rage like armor, never letting him close again? Tell me, because I don't know if forgiveness is strength or surrender. The night the truth came out, silence pressed down heavier than it ever had before. For 30 years, I thought my silence protected us. In the end, It nearly destroyed us. Revenge hadn't given me peace. It had ripped open every wound I had covered for decades. But it also gave me something I hadn't expected: clarity. I sat across from Frank, the pamphlet still crumpled in my hand. He was trembling, not from glue or humiliation anymore, but from the weight of being exposed. For the first time in our marriage, there were no secrets left. And that was my power. "I'm done being quiet," I told him. My voice was steady, though my chest still shook. For 30 years, I carried the burden of lies I thought were about another woman. Now I know they were about money, about gambling, about you trying to play savior without my knowledge. No more. If we are going to face the wreckage you created, it will be on my terms. Frank lowered his eyes like a child scolded, but he didn't argue. He knew I meant every word. I gathered the betting slips, the statements, the pamphlet, and placed them on the table. "We're going to face this debt," I said. "Every last cent. And we're going to face it together. But don't mistake me for the silent wife you knew before. That woman is gone. If you want a partner now, you'll deal with the truth I demand, every single day." For years, I thought revenge would feel like a weapon in my hand. Instead, it felt like a mirror. It showed me how much of my life I had lost by protecting his lies. It showed me the strength I had wasted by burying my voice. And that night, I decided my silence would never return. Neighbors still whispered after the firefighters left. They probably still whisper now. Let them. They saw a spectacle, but they didn't see the prison I broke out of. They didn't see the cage I shattered after 30 years. That freedom was my poetic justice. It's strange how revenge works. I thought gluing Frank to his secrets would give me satisfaction. But it was never the glue. It was the moment I finally spoke. That was my true victory. Not his humiliation, but my freedom. I walked over to my nightstand later that night, opened the drawer, and pulled out the napkin with Brenda's name scrawled on it. The paper had yellowed with age, edges frayed from years of being handled. I stared at it one last time, then placed it in Frank's hand. "This ghost has lived in our house long enough," I said. "It dies tonight." His lips trembled. He nodded, folding the napkin as though it were an obituary. That was the moment I felt lighter. Not free from pain, not free from anger, but free from silence. And that, after 30 years, was worth everything. So let me leave you with this, my dear listener. Silence may feel safe, but it steals your life drop by drop. Speak. Even if your voice shakes, even if it means confrontation, even if the truth shatters the picture you've painted. Because one day, silence will collapse, and when it does, you'll wish you had spoken sooner. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a painful truth too late? Have you ever realized that your silence protected no one, not even yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I learn from them. And if you're watching right now, make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that secrets never stay buried forever. Thank you for watching.